Vintage Pokemon cards are seriously looking like a buyer's market, and I never thought I would say that given how vintage cards have performed in the past. Vintage cards were your gold standard for Pokemon collecting. They were the highest form of Pokemon collectibles. Lately, within 2024, things have really shifted within the vintage market, and I want to go through that today. It's really weird because vintage cards are always seen as the main collectibles for Pokemon, right? Like modern never really stood a chance compared to vintage, and the tide has only shifted this year. Now you may be thinking why vintage cards have gone through this crash, and I do explain that in a previous video. Though what really happened with vintage, right? The main reason why a lot of it has gone downhill is because a lot of the buyers from that COVID boom era, that 2020 boom, have slowly become a little bit disengaged with the hobby, and they bought during that time when they had free time on their hands. They didn't know what to do with themselves. Their friends started collecting Pokemon again. They were looking through their old collection. People were cleaning out their cupboards, people were cleaning out their drawers, and they were finding old collections, and then they slowly all collectively, it was like a collective kind of thing where everyone got together and started buying these vintage cards. It was almost like a collective psychosis. What happened here is a lot of these people were buying cards that had no inherent value associated with them, and what I mean by that is it wasn't like today, right? Today's collector, if I told you to go buy a PSA 5 of a modern chase card, many collectors are now more experienced, and they would say, I wouldn't really want a PSA 5 of a modern chase card, right? Though back then, people were just buying PSA 4s of cards, PSA 5s, PSA 6s of these vintage cards, or they would even buy damaged cards completely with complete whitening, and their corners would be damaged. And what happened was there was this huge influx of people and they couldn't calm down. Now the tide has shifted and a lot of people have liquidated their products. A lot of people have just got stuff in storage. A lot of people are thinking, hey, geez, the economy's not too good. These cards that I bought in 2020, I don't really need them anymore, and they are selling them off. But here's the thing, not many vintage buyers have remained. So you've got a lot of people selling with not a lot of people buying. And that's what I want to go through in this video. And I want to show you some of the price of these vintage cards because it's actually getting really incredible. If we're talking about collectors right now, I can pretty confidently say most people within the Pokemon market right now are collecting modern cards. Like even for yourself, you know, if you're watching this right now, are you collecting vintage or modern? A lot of us are collecting modern, myself included. Though I have to admit that vintage has become a buyer's market. Now I want to go through some prices because I think it's really cool what's happening with the vintage market right now. Now, as you can see, I'm on PSA's website for auction prices realized. This does update much slower than TCG Player, but then when you're looking at vintage cards, even if it's updating, you know, a week later or 2 weeks later, it's still fine and accurate for vintage cards because of the volume of sales, right? Now, the reason why I like going on PSA's website for vintage cards, because on TCG Player, sometimes, you know, the graphs can get a little bit skewed up and down because you have to go look in the sidelines to see if it was a heavy played or a near min or, you know, a moderately played. And the problem is sometimes, you know, someone might sell a really damaged vintage card, and then that can kind of meddle with the graphs because it can kind of pull the price down. So you can't get this real accurate representation of the cards because obviously near mint cards sell for much more than heavy played cards. Problem with vintage is that there's an abundance of these damaged and heavy played cards that go on the market. Modern cards don't really have that much of an issue. You know, you don't have a heavy played Gengar. There would be maybe one of those out of, you know, the 200 sales. Though with vintage, you know, you got for every third sale, there's one that's damaged or something like that. So I'm on PSA's website right now, and you can see I'm looking at the Ampharos first edition from Neo Genesis in a PSA 10. Check this out, guys. So you can see the price for this before, you know, this crazy boom was quite reasonably priced, you know, $68. This was before the boom. Then you had this crazy spike in value and it went up to around $820 in value. Now I'm gonna be putting this on the screen right now just to make it very eligible for you because I know it might be hard to read that small writing. And then we go down here now, and this is the current market that we're dealing with. So you can see it dropped really low in 2023 to around that 59, which is the previous price it had before the boom. And then it kind of recovered, but it's sitting on this quite stable $300 to $350 mark. For a vintage card in PSA 10, that's a really great price. Like if I looked at something like a Gengar or an Umbreon, the pop reports of those are so high and they're getting far more expensive than $350 for a PSA 10. It is really cool to see the price for this. Now, what I like about this is the price will sell the future one. It will go maybe up or down 50 or lower than $50, but that is the new price that's established with this Ampharos. I mean, if you bought this 2-3 years ago, you literally would have paid $826 for it. If you're buying around now, you're going to be selling for give or take between the $250 to the $350 mark. That is a really, really nice price. Now moving forward as well, we got the Meganium PSA 10 first edition, and you can see this one also had some really interesting things happen. So this one was selling before the boom up. We're looking at 2018 around here, $125, $175, $165. It was around, let's just call it $180 card, right? And then of course the boom happened and it shot up all the way to 1,812 in 2020, and it even got to a market high in 2021 of 2,500 US. Very expensive. Though you can see the crash that this has had is incredible. It's now, the last two sales were for 500 and 600, right? The next one that sells, is it gonna go back to a $2,500 card? That is very hard to get that big price increase if the market isn't there. Obviously, people are a little bit standoffish with vintage at the moment. So I highly doubt if this went on auction right now, that it would go to that $2,500 mark, because I just don't think the buyer pool is there at the moment. It may be in a few years because everything is cyclical. People go, ugh, I don't want modern anymore. Now vintage is the thing. But now the pendulum is swinging in the buyer's favor for vintage. How long can this last? I'm not sure, because a lot of people are now aware of this right now, right? A lot of people looking at vintage and saying, wow, now's the time to go in. So this might change, it could change quickly. I'm not sure. I don't want to FOMO or anything, right? I'm just talking, off the top of my head. Obviously right now is a very, very odd time for vintage, because these crashes are quite ridiculously, big, right? This isn't a modern card. This is a PSA 10 card that's over 20 years old. So it is a really cool preservation of an old card. So it's very, very unique. And I do think as time goes on, vintage will still be a strong market. The reason for that is I like to look at Pokemon like Disney, right? If you had a Disney collectible, or Disney had a trading card from the 1930s in their first run when it came out, right? Like whatever, 1934, whenever Disney came out, right? If you had cards from that era still today, yes, they would have went up and down, but in the long run, 60, 70 years later, man, those cards, the original run of Disney cards, would be worth a fortune. And that's how I see Pokemon, because these Neo Genesis cards and base set, they're really that time period of the first run of Pokemon cards. Now, the next one on the list is the PSA 9 Clefable first edition. And of course, this one's also had a pretty cool price. So you can see it was always selling around that 2017 mark for around $30, $26, $39, right? Let's call it a $50 card just to be on the safe side. And then you can keep going up, and you can see it went to a market high of $504 during that boom, as a lot of things did. And then it kind of was finding its feet, kind of went down, and now it's on this real stable kind of $175, $135, $200. So we can now call this, let's call it a $200 card. From a PSA 9 first edition card from 1999, that's a pretty cool card. That is a pretty cool relic from the past, right? It's not gonna go back to a $500 card the next time it's on auction, right? So you're in this kind of cool time period, and a lot of people would be selling right now. The people that were motivated for vintage, is there a lot of vintage buyers in the market right now? 2020 had that buyer pool there. When the buyer pool's not there, and I talk about this a lot in my videos, if the buyer pool is not there, they can only sell it with the buyers in the market. That is only how much that they can sell. Even your Gengar PSA 10 VMAX, your modern card, or this Umbreon card that you have, guys, they can only sell for what buyers are in the market. It's not like, oh, that's a $1,000 card. No, it's a $1,000 card if the buyer's in the market. If the buyer's not in the market, it can be a $20 card. Obviously, that's very unlikely, but seriously, that's how it works, right? Like they only sell for what buyers are in the market. And that's something that, the collector and the investor needs to think about. You're not going to Target and, they've got a retail price point. This is the free economy for these cards. They are just whatever the buyer pays. Moving forward, we can see the PSA 9 first edition Flareon, another crazy card. This is a gorgeous card. This is one of my favorite cards. I'm even thinking about buying one of these at the moment because, geez, like, look at this. It was selling in 2020 for around $820. And then it kind of had this stabilization at around $500, right? And now you can see it is going down, and the last sale price for this was $286. And you can see all the last 5 sales of this were like $250, $227, $265, $225. PSA 9 first edition holo, that is really, really cool of a price. Moving on, and it is one of my favorite cards of all time, and I still don't have this in my collection, and I want a PSA 10, and it's kind of it's probably a good time to go in, but I just don't have the funds for like a $10,000 card for a PSA 10. But this is the PSA 9 Stormfront Charizard. This card is a really cool re-edition of base set. I'm not sure if you know much about Stormfront Charizard, but they pretty much did a re-edition of the Charmander, Charmeleon, and Charizard line from base set, and they put it in Stormfront for 2008, a Diamond and Pearl set. And you can see it was selling around that $81 mark, but then what we have to go into is the major boom that it had. It was selling for 1.5K, selling for around 1.5K, $1,000. And you can now see that this card right now, you can probably get it for around a $700 card. Great, rare card. Very, very valuable card. Very iconic, very unique. And you know, it's obviously Charizard in its base set pose, that amazing illustration. Really love this card. Nothing like it. I think this is one of the most unique cards on the market, given the fact of how it's like a cool throwback to an older time. You know, PSA 9s, you know, at the end of the day, guys, PSA 9s are great cards, right? That is an amazing quality card. The only issue with this card now is the centering. The quality of this card would be immaculate, right? Like PSA 9s, they are sensational cards. And moving on, probably the most interesting one that I think is the PSA 9 first edition Mewtwo. So you can see the sale prices for this were always around that 450 mark, 700, 497. It was pretty like, you know, give or take around that $550 as the kind of base point aggregate between that. Then during the boom, it had a sale price of $8,760 in the, you know, late 2020 when the boom happened. And then it had a slow kind of downturn, and then it kind of sold again for $5,700. And you can see then there was another sale price for $6,000. And you can see what's happened now, that this one over the years has gone down quite a bit, selling for $1,600. Now the last sale price for this, which was only a few months ago, was $1,800 US. A PSA 9 first edition Mewtwo. You know, the fact that it was selling for $8,000, this one's now selling for $1,800. I mean, that is a little bit more expensive than a PSA 10 Umbreon in the current market, right? If you ask me, a PSA 9 first edition Mewtwo or a PSA 10 Umbreon, I mean, you have to think this card is a 25-year-old card. It's from 1999. To see it in a PSA 9 first edition, that to me seems like a great buy. If you were comparing those two, you know, one of them is obviously a perfect card in its PSA 10 equivalent. The other one is a PSA 9, probably just a little bit of issues with the centering, you know, but one's also a 25-year-old card, one's a 3-year-old card. You know, it does beg the question, geez, what is going on with the market right now? Because that is a crazy price, you know, dip, and it's a really, really interesting time to be in the hobby right now with prices like this in vintage. This is just really making me wonder if this is just a buyer's market right now. Like, is vintage a buyer's market? You know, I think a lot of buyers are now gone in vintage. I think they came in and now they've quieted down. And these buyers are obviously drawn into nostalgia. And it's a real reason why Pokemon now is releasing these nostalgia sets. Pokemon 151, you know, the new Team Rocket set, Glory of Team Rocket, that's coming out in 2025. But you really need to ask yourself is, why is Pokemon drawing in these older fans with these new sets and using nostalgia as such a huge play within their current sets? Well, the answer to that is revealed within this video on screen right here. Within this video, I uncover the power of Pokemon's nostalgia and why they focus on it for their success. If you're a fan of older sets, you'll want to watch this video. Click the video that's appearing on screen right now, and I'll see you there.